something happened in the 90s. I saw it then and it concerned me then. And it's what's happened now is in the 90s, a lot of the parents overscheduled their kids. That was just when the overscheduling are going to keep them busy after school and keep them busy so they don't get into trouble. This is, before internet, before smartphones, really. And a lot of these parents chose sports, chose the clubs over church. So church began to be modeled as unimportant to the teens because the parents would choose, they would choose youth group, but sports would have the priority, or they would choose something that would better fit the college resume, the overscheduledness, anything to keep them busy so they wouldn't end up taking drugs, this kind of mindset. But what that modeled for those teens in the 90s was it's okay to belong to a church, but we don't have to go every week. And so what's happened since then is the millennials who are now parents or becoming parents of the alphas have just opted out of church when they got older. Back in the 80s and 90s, to not go to church on Sunday morning was like, oh, you don't go to church? The whole culture goes to church. But by the 2000s, less people are going to church. So today's teens have just grown up not going to church. It just has been an option. And it's been a not chosen option. And the numbers are fairly low. I can probably find them here. Yes. And since 2020, Gen Z attendance and going to church weekly has dropped from 22% to 16%. Only 16% of Gen Z are going to church on a weekly basis because it's just been optional. But what has also happened at the same time over these decades here is because they have not grown up in church. They don't have the baggage of church and they don't have the teaching of church. And Gen Z and Gen Alpha are very, very curious about Jesus. He's, if you go to TikTok or anything, Jesus is a fascinating character on those platforms, but they don't know really who Jesus is. A 30-second video is not going to really teach you much, but it does make you curious. Right. And so I really believe those churches that are teaching who Jesus is are meeting a curiosity for a generation that did not grow up in church. And they are going to return because they just need to learn about Jesus. And there's an assumption. I go to church, I'm supposed to learn about Jesus. But, churches as an institution have become convoluted with agendas, and there's a whole other conversation right there. Yeah. But if we can just keep teaching about who Jesus is, we're going to become a very curious group for this generation that grew up not having to attend church. And again, I think older pastors think church is full of baggage for the younger generations, and it's not, because they weren't in church to gain that baggage. Their parents were, but they were not.
Wow, that's really interesting. But it's true, though, when you think about it. And I love how we're using social media, even if it's like a small 10-second clip, you're still planting a seed. And like you said, building up that curiosity so they can continue to discover who he is on their own. So I love that.
Yes. And, again, the assumption is you will learn about Jesus in church. So if they go to a church and they're learning about an agenda, well, they're out. They don't trust institutions. But if they can learn about Jesus, and this is the biggest thing a church can offer, older adults who have made it and lived a lifelong faith are fascinating to Gen Z who has had a disruptive life. And these older generations who maybe think, are put out to pasture or something, have a lifelong knowledge of faith that this younger generation craves that stability, craves that endurance. And if you put those two together in a learning situation, this is revival connected to older people who can root them in who Jesus is, because they have lived it for 60, 80 years. This is a great connection, and you can only find this in the church. You don't find a mix of generations in the culture, but you do find this in the church.
That's really good. So, for a parent that might be listening, how can they help their teens really have a desire to learn more about Jesus, to grow in their faith without controlling them?
Yes, yes. I want to just say asterisk that because this is very important. Again, 40 years as a youth pastor, I have never been the important person in a teen's life. The parent and the parent's influence has always outranked me for all these years. And it was the same in the 80s. It's even more so now. You parent are the most important faith influence your teen is going to have. And they're going to pick up, if you have a fear-filled faith, they're going to pick that up. If you have an angry faith, you're angry at God for some reason, they're going to pick that up. So the best gift you can give your teen is honest faith conversations together where they can, they're going to have some new thoughts about God. And if they can express them to you and you can just sit down and have these honest conversations, you're going to give your teen roots that as they grow, develop, their brains grow, all this adolescent development that is happening, that they have their parents, you, mom or dad or both, can just ground them in the truth of what you have learned. That will be the greatest stabilizer you can pass on to your kid. The thing is, parents don't feel confident in passing on what they learned about their faith, probably because it's filled with failure or,
Yeah.
or there are times of doubt or the times that they've screwed up, or there might be even some shame involved in this. It doesn't matter to your kid. It doesn't matter to
Yeah.
your kid. You're still the voice in their head. You're still the one they want to know, to see that this faith is working. And you're going to model that for them. They still want to hear it from you first. And then again, you have a church. I hope you're in a church and that's full of these great adults that can help supplement the message that you are giving. And I ask you as a parent to one, go to church, go to a church that teaches about Jesus, doesn't have any other agenda but that. And two, find 5 other adults you will intentionally give your teen, that you will say, if you have a question about your faith, go talk to, this lady or this person or the person who were in sound. Sit down one day and, talk to these people. And you've given them, and you tell these 5 people, I'm giving you my daughter to talk to you about your faith, about life stuff. And I trust you to pass on the truth to her. So that when you feel like you don't have the wisdom, at least you've given them 5 other adults at least who will invest into them and just meet them for coffees regularly. And again, be a voice to answer their questions and their doubts. This is the best kind of modeling.
And for the people who don't feel as confident, like you said, it takes a village, okay? It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to always fully be on us as parents. Some people are single mothers, they feel the
Mm-hmm.
burden, they
Exactly.
have multiple children. So use your community. I'm hearing really the essence of it is like having that supportive, faith-based community to be able to raise your children up in and them to have like mentors in their lives to lean on as well, other than you, that will really
Yes.
echo what you've been teaching them at home.
Which means you got to find a church. I mean, we just
Yeah.
have got to trust this institution of the church, because this is one of the rare places where you can find safe mentors. And you got these aged saints who have so much to pass on, and you get to ask them to be a part of your teen's life. What this is not a greater gift you can give them. And these aged saints are going to be the ones who are going to follow them in college and still encourage them until they good to go to heaven themselves. You want these kind of people, and you find them in church.
So you spoke about this just briefly about like church hurt and stuff like that, trust issues. How how do those experiences impact people's like I guess faith in God? And if a person has been through like maybe trauma within the church, how can they kind of transition back into the church?
This is a really good question, because I kind of like the one about pain. I don't take this issue lightly. I don't treat this with a platitude. But when your trust has been broken, um, whether it's by a human, then we kind of offload it onto God as a blame, or sometimes we just feel that disappointment that God didn't answer a prayer, or you trusted God with your mother's health and she died anyway, and you're like, God, I thought you were there for me, and we transpose. This is real pain. This is real hurt. And I just want to just take a moment. I've written a Bible study about this called Trust Issues with God. And this was put together through my church. We've talked about this stuff often enough at my church that my church said to me, you need to put this into Bible study form. It's a workbook. It's a hard workbook. It's not easy because this is a hard issue to work through. But what it basically is realizing that what we call in my church, our church is called Larger Story Church. We believe in a larger story God, that God holds the whole story. And in this one moment, it looks like it's the end. And so I don't trust God anymore. But when we dig into the word, and you do this 125 plus verses to study in this Bible study, you start seeing again and again how God is there for you. And you start understanding things you didn't have before. And then all of a sudden your trust starts growing back again. So I'm going to say it takes some hard work. It takes, again, we talked about this in the beginning. We're kind of repeating here how you got to get into the word, even if it's by audio, some way to get into the word, because this is the consistent message that God is worthy of our trust for so many reasons. 5 times in the scripture, it says the Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, rich in love, and faithful. There's 5 of them. It says that 5 times. It's the best description. And when you study all 5 of those, and you see it throughout the whole Bible, you're like, okay, God is faithful and compassionate, slow to anger, rich in love. You study those things, you're like, that's not my view of who God is. So where did something break in here? And while you see what broke in you, you still see how God has been faithful and is holding this larger story for you the entire time.